Thank you for coming back after the coffee break. We hope that you are able to get the caffeine jolt that you need. I would like to thank MERI and Dr. Delawar for this opportunity to moderate a session today and also to be with this distinguished panel. The last couple of days, we've been hearing a lot about Iraq and the region, and we started off speaking specifically about Iraq. And then we were talking, and then basically the circle kind of got bigger. I think it's time for us to look at our allies and the friends and the people that are actually making a difference in this region. As you all know, and we all say, in Iraq, we definitely are not separate from what happens around us. In the last session, there was a lot of talk about the geopolitics and looking at what's important and understanding who the local players are. And I think that was important. But at the same time, there are a lot of other actors and other factors that actually are contributing to what is happening in the region. Today, we have a very distinguished panel, and we will be talking about the global actors in Iraq's neighborhood, and we would like to hear from each and every one of you about what your policies are, what your country's policies are about with regards to the region, and what your long-term strategies are to ensure that we have a stable region and a stable Iraq. So, Jen, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. Is this working? There we go. All right. First of all, many thanks for the opportunity to be here today and for the organization of this great conference. Also happy to represent the female gender up on the stage. A lot of discussion about that yesterday. We're building back better here. So I thought I would just talk for a few minutes about the Biden administration's focus and priorities for the Middle East. Overall, since taking office in January of 2021, we have been working on reorienting our foreign policy to address the global challenges that are going to define the future. President Biden has been reinvigorating American diplomacy, rebuilding alliances with our partners, and helping citizens all over the world realize their aspirations for a better future. Our engagement in the Middle East is really anchored in these values. Building partnerships, we've been focused on regional prosperity and values that bring respect and dignity for all peoples. And also focus on policies that lead to greater innovation and opportunity, which we believe are the basis for long-term regional stability. This starts with building back better, if you will, from COVID-19 pandemic, and most notably, with a nod to our moderator from the last session, we've put particular focus on environmental protection and working with partners and allies to save our climate. We've supplied nearly 8 million COVID vaccine doses to the people of the Middle East, and we're working to send millions more. Special Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, traveled to Saudi Arabia this week for the Middle East Green Initiative Summit, where leaders had an opportunity to reaffirm their commitment to accelerating climate action. We believe that it is in our common interest to advance policies that end conflict, fight corruption, promote human rights, and create jobs while preserving our climate for future generations. The United States intends to collaborate as much as possible with our friends in the Middle East to solve the various regional and global challenges that are facing us. Throughout the region, including in the Gulf, our relationships are rooted in our joint efforts to promote regional security and stability, to promote bilateral trade and investment, and to expand meaningful people-to-people ties. Our partnerships have been built up over the course of decades under multiple US administrations from different political parties. To give you a scope of the breadth of this relationship, the United States had $157 billion in trade with the region in 2019. Over 2 million people with ancestry from the Middle East and North Africa reside in the United States, and over 1.5 million students from this region have studied in US colleges and universities. We depend on these relationships and our partnerships in the Middle East to address things like COVID-19, developing a health infrastructure to prevent future pandemics, to counter terrorism, to de-escalate regional tensions, to reduce conflict, to address desertification and water shortages, and to build a new energy economy to arrest the drivers of climate change. As we saw this summer, our relationships in this region matter. Our Gulf partners were key allies when it counted to help American citizens and citizens from all over this region, along with the Afghans who were at risk. Now, given the situation in Afghanistan, which I want to address head on, I recognize that people are concerned. And so to the people that are both watching and from Iraq, I think it's really important to say this. Iraq is not Afghanistan. We are here for the long term. We view Iraq as a key strategic relationship, a key strategic partner in addressing all of the challenges that I've raised. We are committed to that relationship as a strategic basis for stability and security throughout the Middle East. As President Biden said during his meeting with Prime Minister Khatami in July and his meeting with President Saleh at the UN in September, Iraq's stability is central to the stability of the Middle East. The US works in partnership with the Iraqi government, the Kurdistan Regional government, and the people of Iraq to support a stable, sovereign, prosperous, and democratic country. The US presence as part of the Defeat ISIS mission in Iraq is transitioning at the end of this year to a strictly advising, assisting, and enabling role. We're shifting to a new phase, which is based on the enhanced capabilities of the Iraqi security forces. That being said, ISIS is not yet defeated, and we remain committed to the fight and to the ongoing development of the Iraqi security forces, including the Peshmerga. The US-Iraq relationship goes far beyond security cooperation, though. We seek to bolster Iraqi sovereignty and are expanding our cooperation in any variety of ways that define what we consider to be a key bilateral relationship. That includes the economy, trade, climate change, education, security, culture, people-to-people ties. And we look forward to continuing to expand that in a variety of areas. We were proud to assist Iraq in its commitment to hold early elections by contributing $10 million to UNAMI, an additional $5 million to support the technically sound elections. Once the results are certified, we look forward to continuing to work with the next Iraqi government in an expansion of all of the areas that I've outlined. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
And happy to build on any of that as we go forward.
Thank you. Well, definitely, what you've raised, what you have said raises some questions, but we'll get back to that for sure. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Definitely, there is no denying, excuse me, your country's presence in the region, and it's the role that you are playing, and we wanted to see and understand and hear from you what your policy is with regards to the region as a whole, and then we'll get into more specifics.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity to be present at this conference and at this panel, precisely. I've read instructions to this meeting, and I understood that I shouldn't torture you with too long speeches, so I'll try to put it as briefly as possible, though my English cannot be as good as Jennifer's, by the way. So in general, Russia is present in the Middle East since decades, and we have strong positions here. And of course, we have priorities. So these priorities and level of our action and interaction was changing from time to time according to situation in the Middle East and priorities of Middle East countries. If we speak today about Middle East today, so it's well known that the region is not stable, it is fragmented, it is overfilled with confrontations and struggles, and we have to take all this into consideration when we put our policies. It's worth mentioning that we don't have enemies or rivals in the region in terms of Russian interests. Well, most countries are our friends. Well, some of them at least can be neutral to us, but I'm sure we enjoy good friendship and cooperation with most of countries. Even those countries which have maybe strained relationship between each other, they can have good relationship with Russia, and I'm proud to say that. In terms of interests, well, in the previous period, in Soviet era, we had big military and economic interests in the region. Now, they are not our priority. Of course, we have economic interests, we have military interests, but I said it's not priority. Priority for us is having good political dialogue, political relationship with the Middle East countries, and supporting them in terms of reaching the necessary level of stability and security. For us, Middle East is not something which is very far. It's our neighboring region. In the 90s, when we had problems in south of Russia, in Chechnya and neighboring regions where international terrorists used to struggle to fight against Russia, so we witnessed the flow of fighters from the Middle East to Russia, to south of Russia. Then recently, when Daesh emerged in Syria and Iraq, we all witnessed big flow of terrorists from Russia to this region. So it shows that in terms of security, national security and stability, we are in the same boat with the Middle East. So this is what we take into consideration when we deal with each Middle East problem, with each Middle East country, and with situation inside each Middle East country. Well, what we look at in terms of priority now, I won't hide it from you, it is first of all Syria and Libya. They are a major concern to us in terms of regional security, stability, and even threat and challenge to international security and stability. Then we, of course, monitor closely and actively situation in Lebanon, in Yemen, well, North Africa, other places. And now we come to Iraq. Iraq is, well, it's hard for me to evaluate Russian role in Iraq because my whole life is filled with Iraq and Syria, and my diplomatic career started in Iraq in 1999. So this is something that has become part of my life, and I'm pro-Iraqi lobby in Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So even though I'll try to be, how to say it, غير منحاز.
Bias,
yeah, somehow independent, thank you. I hope that most of people here understand both languages, so sometimes I will switch from one language to another. For us, Iraq is one of major states in the region, and as I've mentioned, one of priorities in the region. And thanks God, I'm happy to say that it is not priority number one, because we don't have to worry about Iraq to the level of how we worry about, for example, Syria or Libya. So I hope that would continue. Though, of course, as ambassador, I may have some ambitions to be ambassador to the country number one, but thanks God I'm not. Well, history. Am I running out of time, Tanya?
You have
it's
one
all
more
fine?
minute. You have one more minute.
Stop me at some moment. Well, our history of our relationship with Iraq is very long, so it is decades. It started from President Abdul Karim Qasim, and all changing regimes in Iraq, we had to deal with them, and we had good relationships sometimes with leaders or governments which were later executed, and new ones came, and we had to establish good relationships with them. And this made us feel quite flexible in Iraq. So We don't interfere in its internal affairs. We distance ourselves from all internal struggles. And this makes us feel comfortable, especially nowadays. So people ask me how you evaluate the results of elections, or what do you think about future prime minister? And I can respond officially, I would be happy to see any Iraqi prime minister, because they are all our friends, all candidates. And even those who are not candidates, they are all our friends. So it's fine for us, anybody comes. What we want is that this country to be stable, to be secure, to political process to be going, and that is our interest. In terms of economic interest, of course we have them. Well, our oil companies have invested billions to Iraq. Well, some of them evaluated as 14 billion. So, of course, this is big economic interest, but this is not number one, what we are doing in Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. We'll get into more details as well.
Sorry for not being able to mention Kurdistan, but maybe later on.
Well, definitely. I'm sure a lot of questions will come on about Kurdistan. If you have your mics, Kak Adil will be speaking in Kurdish, the translation. Kak Adil, حتما جنابتك ئێمە کە باس لەوە دەکەین بڵێن لەو وڵاتانەی کەوا تەسیریان هەیە لە ناوچەکەیە فەرەنسا یەکێک لەو وڵاتانەیە جنابت خۆشت کە یەکێک شارەزای لە فەرەنسا و لمانە حتما ئەوەی دەیبینین کەس ناتوانێت هیچ لایەنێک نییە بتوانێت بڵێتن فەرەنسا ڕۆڵێک سەرەکی نەبووە لە جوڵاندنی بڵێن لایەنە جیاوازەکان لە ناوچەکەیە بە تایبەتی لە عێراقیشە پێمان خۆش بوو ئەمڕۆ هەندێک باسی ئەومان بۆ بکەیتەوە بخێنەوەی جنابەت چییە یان بۆ ئەوەی کەوا استراتیجیەتی فەرەنسا لە ناوچەکەیە چییە بە چی شێوازێک تەسیر دەکاتن نەکو بڵێن بەس لەسەر عێراقە بەڵام لە هەمان کاتیشە لە وڵاتەکانی دەوروبەری خۆشی
باش سپاس بۆ جەنابتان سپاس بۆ پرۆفیسۆر دلاوەر عەلادین بۆ ئەم بانگێشتە تێبینێکی بچووک من دیپلۆمات نیم بۆ ئەوەی ڕوون بێ لای هەموو لایەک و نوێنەرایەتی دیپلۆماسی فەڕەنسی ناکەم من سەرۆکی ناوەندی فەڕەنسیم بۆ توێژینەوە لەسەر عێراق من لەسەر دیپلۆماسی ئیشەکەم بەس دیپلۆمات نیم لەسەر سیاسەت ئیشەکەم بەس سیاسی نیم ئەو دوو شتا لە یەک جیا بکەینەوە باشە بۆ خۆشحاڵم لەگەڵ دوو دیپلۆماتە لێرە لە خزمەتی جەنابتانە ڕاستەکەی بە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست دەست پێ یەکەم دوایی ئەگەڕێمەوە سەر عێراق چەندێک کاتم هەیە 3 دقە 4 5 دقە زۆر باشە بە 5 دقە هەوڵ دەدەم کۆتایی پێبێنم هاوڕێیان ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست لە بەردەم مەترسێکی زۆر گەورایە و فەڕەنساش و یەکێتی ئەوروپاش بە شێوەیەکی گشتی بەرپرسیارەتی زۆر گەورەی هەیە مەترسێ گەورەکە بریتێ لە شی ناڕۆمە ناو تەفاسیلەکانە بە خێرا ئاماژەی پێم ئەفغانستان تونس لە ئەفغانستان ئەم ساڵ ئەزمونێک تەواو ئەبێت بە ناوی 20 ساڵ بەسەر تێپەڕین بەسەر 11 سێپتەمبەرە 20 ساڵ بەسەر 11 سێپتەمبەرە ئەمە 20 ساڵ کە کاملە بێ قابلی ئەوەیە شیاوی ئەوەیە کە ئێمە بە وردی بیری لێ بکەینەوە چی ڕوویدا لە 11 سێپتەمبەرە 11 سێپتەمبەری 2001 و چی ڕوویدا لە 11 سێپتەمبەری 2021 لە ماوەی 20 ساڵ وڵاتێکی گرنگت هەیە کە پێی وترێ ئەفغانستان بزوتنەوەیەکت هەیە کە پێی وترێت تالیبان هەموو کەرەسەکانی تیرۆریزمی بۆ خۆی ئەدەپتەیشن کردووە وانە ینی با بڵێن بەکاری هێناوە لە بەرامبەر هاوپەیمانی ئەنتەرناسیۆنال بەگشتی و ئەمریکا بە تایبەتی لە کوشتن لە فڕاندن لە لێدان دوای 20 ساڵ لە مقاومە بە تیرۆریزمیشەوە وڵاتانی سیستمی ئەنتەرناسیۆنال بەگشتی و ویلایەتە یەکگرتووەکانی ئەمریکا بە تایبەتی بە فەرشی سوورەوە ئایانهێننەوە بۆ دەسەڵات ئەفغانستانیان تەسلیمەکەن لە تونس ئەزمونێکی دیموکراسیت هەیە حیزبەکان لە ڕێگای دەنگدان و دیموکراسیەوە حکوومەتێک پێک ئەهێنن بۆی لەسەر خۆم قساکەم بۆی تەرجەمەکە بڕاتچوو گەرنا بە تەبیعەتی حاڵ زۆر پەلە قساکەم دەسەڵاتێک دروستە بێ حکوومەتێک دروستە بێ حکوومەتێکی ئێتلافی حزبی نازە کە حزبێکی پۆست ئیسلامیستە لە ڕێگای شەرعیەتی دیموکراسیەوە ئەگاتە دەسەڵات بەشێک لە دەسەڵات و غەنووشی کە مۆدرنترین ئیسلامیستە لە جیهانە مۆدرنترین ئیسلامیستە لە جیهانە ئەبێ بە سەرۆکی پەرلەمان کە قوبوڵیەکە بەڵام ئەیکەینە دەرەوە وانی ئەیکەینە دەرەوە هاوڕێیان گوێ بگرن 100 ملیۆن گەنج لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە هەیە بەلای کەمەوە 100 ملیۆن گەنج لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە هەیە ئەم مەسیژە من لەگەڵ ڕۆژانە بە دیپلۆماتە ئەوروپیەکانی ئەڵم دەستم نەگەیشتووە بە ئەمریکیەکان تازە لە هەفتەی ڕابردووەوە لە پاریس هاتن بۆ لام بینی من ئەم مەسیژیان پێڵم ئێوە ئەتانەوێت لەم ڕێگایەوە یەکێتی ئەوروپا و ئەمریکا چ بەم 100 ملیۆن گەنجەی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بڵێن تالیبان بە مۆدێلی مقاومەی چەکداری و تیرۆریزمەوە ئەگاتە دەسەڵات قوبوڵ یەکەین نەهزە بە ڕێگای دیموکراسی و شەرعیەتی دیموکراسی و شەرعەتی دەنگدان ئەیکەینە دەرەوە زۆر خەتەرە کە ئێمە 100 ملیۆن گەنجی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بخەینە بەردەم ئەم پرسیار لە خۆکردنە 5 دقەمەیە لە سەری ناڕۆماکرێت دوایی لە دەیبێتەکە بگەڕێنەوە سەری خاڵی دووەم سیاسەتی فەڕەنسا لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بە گشتی و عێراق بە تایبەتی فەڕەنسا ڕۆڵێکی مێژوویی هەم لە لوبنانە بینیوە هەم لە سووریا بینیوە بەڵام لە سەردەمی سەرۆک ماکرۆنە ئەم ڕۆڵە وردە وردە لە ڕووی جیۆگرافی و گۆڕانکاری بەسەرا دێ لە لوبنان و سووریاوە ئەپەڕێتەوە بۆ عێراق بۆ بەغا و هەولێر ڕاستەوخۆ چەند جار دووبارەی کردوێتەوە کە وشەی پیڤۆی بەکارهێناوە لو پیڤۆ جومۆیە نۆڕیۆن ئەیەوێت عێراق بکە بە چەقی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بۆ ئەوێ عێراق بکە بە چەقی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست لەبەر ئەوەی کە کۆمەڵێک هۆکارن بە خێرایی ئێڵم هۆکاری یەکەمیان سیکیوریتی لەبیرتان نەچێ وەکو دیپلۆماتێکی گەورەی فەڕەنسی بە منی وت مووسڵی داعش تەنها 6 سەعات بە تایارە لەم پاریسەوە دوورە 6 سەعات لە مووسڵەوە سواری تایارە بە لە ناو پاریسای لە بیرمان نەچێ هەر لێرە وتم وانێ 2 هەفتە لەمەوە پێش لە کۆنفرانسێکی تر کە داعش ئەگاتە دەسەڵات لە مووسڵ بە تەکلان دروستە بێ 130 گەنجی فەڕەنسی لە کاتی سەما و گۆرانی وتنا قەتڵ و عامەکرێن تا ئێستاش ترۆماتیزمێکی دروست کردووە لە فەڕەنسا ئەسڵ کۆمەلگای فەڕەنسی تووشی شۆک کردووە چۆن فەڕەنسا کەوتە ئەم دۆخەوە لەبەرەوە پرسی سکیوریتی زۆر گەرنگە بۆ فەڕەنسا ناتوانێت بە هیچ شێوەیەک بە هەندی وەرنەگرێ ئەو پرسی سکیوریتیش لە عێراقەوە دەست پێەکە ئەڕوا بۆ ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست دەگاتە ئەوروپا خاڵی دووهەم کە بۆ فەڕەنسا گرنگە پرسی جیۆپۆلیتیکە عێراق لە ناو دڵی جیۆپۆلیتیکایە نازانم جارێکی کە وتم یاننا لە بیرمان نەچێت لە جورف و سەخرەوە بەشێک لە میلیشیاکان ئەتوانن درۆن بنێرن بۆ قەسفکردنی وڵاتانی کەنداو لە بیرمان نەچێت کە فەڕەنسا 2 قاعیدەی سەربازی گرنگی هەیە لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە یەکێکیان لە ئوردونە ئەویتریان لە ئیماراتە و هەروەها پرسیاری جیۆپۆلیتیک کۆماری ئیسلامی ئێران پرسێکی سنتراڵە بۆ فەڕەنسا کە لە نزیکەی زیاتر لە 1200 کیلۆمەتر حدودی هەیە لەگەڵ عێراقا هەم حدودی خاک وشکانی هەم حدودی ئاو و هەروەها تورکیا لە بیرمان نەچێت کە ئێستا تورکیا بۆ بە پرسیارێکی سنتراڵ بۆ فەڕەنسا تەنهانەت سەرۆک ماکرۆن پێی وایە تورکیا دەستەخاتە ناو هەڵبژاردنەکانی مانگی 4 ساڵی داهاتووشەوە تا ئەو ڕادە پەیوەندەکە ئالۆز بووە لە نێوانیانە پرسێکی تریش کە زۆر گرنگە بۆ فەڕەنسا پرسی ئیکۆنۆمی ئابووریە ناڕۆمە ناو تەفاسیلەکەی بەستەنها داتایەکتانە دەمێ هەمووتان ئاگاتان لێبوو کە سەرۆک ماکرۆن هات 2 ڕۆژ دوای ئەو 27 ملیار دۆلاری واژوو کرا لە نێوان فەڕەنسا و عێراقا پرسیارێکی تریش لە دوایی کۆتایی پێیانم لەسەر ئەو پرسانەی تر پرسی سووریایە عێراق ئەو خاکەیە کە هێزی تایبەتی فەڕەنسا بەسەریا تێپەڕێ بۆ ئەوەی بڕاتە سووریا بەبێ عێراق بە کوردستانیشەوە بە هەرێمی کوردستانەوە فەڕەنسا ئەو هەلەی لە بەردەستا نابێ کە ئەو ڕۆڵە گرنگە ئەیەوێ لە سووریا بیبینێ لە سووریای رووسیا و لە سووریای ئێران و لە سووریای تورکیا و لە سووریای ئەمریکا و ئەو شانسە کێ ئەیاتێ لە بەرامبەر ئەم هەموو ئەکتەرە گەورە فەڕەنساش قسەی هەبێ خاکی عێراق بەگشتی و هەرێمی کوردستان بە تایبەتی لەبەر ئەوە کە کتێبەکەی من بڵاو بووە عێراق سەدەیەک لە شکست بەڕێوبەری ئەفریقای باکوور و ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست ئەم پرسیارەی لێکردم تی باشە ئۆکەی سەدەیەک لە شکست بەڵام ئێستا ئێمە چی بکەین بۆ ئەوەی عێراق لەم شکستە بێنینە دەرەوە بێگومان کاتمان نییە بڕۆینە ناو تەفاسیلەکەی بە یەک دقە باش نییە بە یەک دقە سێ چارەسەرم خستوەتە بەردەسی من پێم وایە من وەکو توێژەرە قساکەم دیسانەوە من دیپلۆمات نێمە بە ئەوە ڕوون بێ لە چارەسەری یەکەمیان ئەو خەون و یوتیوبیەیە کە فەڕەنسیەکان و پێرسێکۆکس لە 1920 هەتا وەکو پۆلبریمەر خەونیان پێوە بینی بیناکردنی نەتەوەیەکی عێراقی بۆنا ئەتوانین سەدەیەکی تر بەکار بێنین بۆ ئەوەی هەوڵ بدەین نەتەوەی عێراقی دروست بکەین سەدەیەک لە شکست نەمانتوانی سەدەیەکی تریش ئەتوانین بە ملیار دۆلار سەرف بکەین بەڵام شانسی دروستکردنی نەتەوەیەکی عێراقی زۆر لاوازە بەڵام ئەکری چارەسەرێک بێ خاڵی دووهەم تەواوی پێکەم خاڵی دووهەم ئەوەیە کە عێراقیەکان هاوڕێتیان بکەین یارمەتیان بدەین بۆ ئەوەی ئەو فۆرمەی کە ئێستا عێراقی بلۆک بکردووە بڕۆن بە دوای فۆرمێکی ترا بدۆزنەوە خۆیان بیدۆزنەوە ئێمەی ئەوروپی ئێمەی ئەمریکی و رووسی هاوکاریان بکەین لەگەڵیان نابین بۆی فۆرمێکی تر خۆیان بیدۆزنەوە بۆ ئیدارەکردنی وڵاتەکەیان خاڵی سێمیش لەتر کۆتایی پێێنم ئەزانم کاتم نەماوە ئەوەیە کە واز لە عێراقەکان بێنین لە کۆڵانە داخراوەکە بمێنەوە هەڵبژاردن تاو وەنیە ئەبێ حکومە دروست بکەن هەمیشە لە نێوان هەڵبژاردن و دروستکردنی حکومەتە مەسافەیەکی درێژ هەیە ئەو مەسافە لە عێراق ئاکری هەفتەیەک بێ مانگێک بێ کۆمەڵێک چەند مانگێک بێ ئەکرێت تا ساڵیش تێپەڕێ عێراق بەو هەموو قەیرانەوە تاوە بم بەو هەموو قەیرانەوە توانای ئەوەیە لەم کۆڵانە داخراوە بمێنێتەوە یان نا
زۆر سپاس. Thank you very much. Definitely there were some very valid points that we'll get back to, especially what you talked about in terms of I thought you were very optimistic when you were talking about, Iraq forming the government. It could be in about a week or it can take a year. Well, it's probably mostly likely the latter. But Jen, I think it's important for us, if I come back to you and what you said, and I think that it's very important. Yesterday we heard Ambassador Tuller say as well, and a lot of the participants here were asking if the U.S. was going to withdraw from Iraq and from the region. And I know you definitely reiterated that you will not basically leave us hanging and dry to fend for ourselves, because unfortunately Iraq and in the region, I think if there aren't stabilizing factors, I think it becomes very difficult for us to be able to manage. But also, it's not this fear is not coming from Iraq only, but also from the Gulf states, the other, the Arab Gulf states, and they have the same concerns with regards to, the U.S. presence, and they always feel like it's a security blanket, and there has been a lot of investment in the region and so on. So I really wanted to hear. If they've reached out to you, not to you, to the United States, and and what the plans really are in place, and what guarantees have been given to ensure that the United States will be involved in this area, in this region.
Sure. First of all, you're absolutely right. Our partnership with our Gulf allies is very much based on shared understanding of the challenges facing this region. Happy to go into those, but to address the elephant in the room, we heard a very rosy picture in the last session about the role of Iran in this region, and I think we, collectively with our partners and allies, see that quite a bit differently. Our overarching goal when it comes to regional security is to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. That's something that we're working with both of the countries up on this stage to ensure that doesn't happen. But our concerns actually go far beyond that, to include the missile program and Iran's activities in places like Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and certainly here in Iraq, where they continue to support militias acting outside of the Iraqi government control. And so we have a very robust dialogue with our Gulf partners that is focused on helping to both build the security of the region in a way, and we've bandied about the word de-escalation an awful lot lately, in ways that promote stability, in ways that expand economic prosperity for all people, and in ways that de-escalate by offering a more positive, better vision for the future than those conflicts that I just mentioned provide. You know, it would be irresponsible to talk about the Gulf without talking about the breadth of the trade relationship. I mentioned that in my opening remarks, but again, it goes far beyond that to cultural ties, to educational exchanges. Essentially, you know, I talked about what the role of the United States would be in Iraq after December 31st with the transition away from combat operations. And I talked about it in terms of normal bilateral relationships, and that's what we're pursuing with the Gulf countries. Ultimately, we believe that it is by building prosperity, by offering support in the development of environmentally friendly practices that promote long-term prosperity, that we can counter best the malign forces that we see at work.
Do you actually see that Iraq is closer to the Gulf states now? Or is this, you know, has this conversation been more inclusive to include Iraq in that conversation as well?
Absolutely, and I want to reiterate that, you know, for us, Iraq, and my colleague mentioned the same, is really central to our vision for a stable Middle East. And so activities that we've seen over the last months, for example, Baghdad's hosting of the Baghdad Regional Conference and plans to move that forward. In fact, they did at the UN General Assembly, but plans to extend that into next year. Hosting of the direct Saudi-Iran talks, all of those activities demonstrate that it's not just the United States, but rather all of our partners that really see Iraq increasingly taking a positive role central to Middle East stability writ large. We are actively promoting a negotiation of a energy agreement between the GCC and Iraq that would help to improve Iraq's energy independence and, frankly, to again diminish its reliance on Iran, which can then be exploited for any variety of reasons. And so the Gulf partners have absolutely recognized the centrality with us of Iraq to this larger vision that I think we share with them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ambassador, we hear a lot about the alliances or the work that is you know, getting closer to Syria, to Turkey, to Iran, and so on. I'm going to ask the same thing about what are those relationships with the Gulf states and how close are you? And has that been part of that trying to I guess you can say, deepen your footprint in the region? How long or how strong has that strategic relationship been? Or is it strong at all?
You mean Russia and Gulf states?
Yes.
In terms of Gulf states as expression, do you mean Iraq or other Gulf states except Iraq?
No, I'm saying the other Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states.
Well, now we're enjoying a very good, I would say, era of very good relationship with Gulf states. So, some time ago we had the kind of Cold War with some of these states. Now it is in the past. We're having very good political dialogue. I had the chance to be present personally at a number of negotiations in Saudi Arabia, in Emirates, in other countries. So I can say it is very friendly and sometimes even very informal in terms of how our leaders talk to each other. For the Gulf states, we have Russian concept, Russian idea for providing collective security in the Gulf region. So we came with this idea in 1995. Then it was developed again, moderated several times, and we are still pushing it forward. The main idea is that a complex of measures can be taken and must be taken in order to provide security in the region, which includes, of course, all Gulf states, Arab and non-Arab, plus interested powers from which are not regional. And this is quite a good idea with which everybody agrees, but up to now, unfortunately, nothing was achieved on the ground because everybody every time has agendas which should be pushed forward today. So the idea of security and stability is always left for somehow tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But finally, I was happy to witness that idea of Iran being an essential part of regional security and stability, and first of all in the Gulf, is now acknowledged more and more in different countries and from different political elites. And this is in fact the reason for Iraq playing a mediation role between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So previously we could hardly imagine it. Now this is going on, and I hope that it would continue. Well, though it's going slowly, as it is usual in the Middle East, inshallah, bukra ma'alish, so it's happening, but still it's moving forward.
So let me ask you another question. And you did talk about Iran, but I mean, a lot of times we find that this alliance or this with Iran, it really is kind of complicated, I think. And I think it'll be, if you can explain to us in so many words, how do you characterize that alliance with Iran, between Russia and Iran?
Russia and Iran. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we, from the very beginning, recognized Iranian right to possess nuclear energy, peaceful atomic energy, and supported the Iranian nuclear problem in this respect. Well, that's why we know very well what's going on there. This is first. Second, as I've mentioned, we look at Iran as the country without which it's senseless to discuss a huge number of Middle East problems, because this or that way Iranians are involved. And finally, this is what we say, maybe not out loudly, but we say it. Those who are unhappy about Iranian influence in the region, and especially in some countries, should think about not confronting this Iranian influence, but dealing with reasons for which Iran is playing such a big role. For example, in Syria. Since we don't have any problems with Iran, we are not strategic allies with Iran, as far as I understand. I'm not authorized to make statements on Iran, because according to our bureaucratic system, Iran is outside Middle East. So some other ambassador might be responsible speaking about Iran. But in general, well, I understand it. If we mention Syria, Russian efforts in Syria, so of course in Syria we are allies with Iran, because we have same enemy, international terrorism, against which we struggle together. Then it's worth mentioning that if it hadn't been for Iranian economic aid, well, Syria would have got crushed very long ago. So even gas for vehicles is provided by Iranians, in fact, for nothing. So again, sometimes even Syrians might be not happy about the role Iran plays in Syria in terms of political weight or military weight, but they can do nothing with it. They need Iranian support very much, sometimes badly. So, again, I would repeat it, it's not about Syria only. If you are worried about too much Iranian role in this or that country, look at reasons and look at how you can contribute to dealing with these reasons. And confronting Iran, well, is not a fruitful policy. Well, we can see it here in the Middle East.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. كاك عادل جنابت زور باسي مسألة بوليسي فرنسا كردو كوا بلين نيتكانيان تشيا كوا استهتمامي كي زور بناوتشا كددن وبتايبتي بعراق وكهاتني بريزيدنت ماكرون كهات بإيرانا تشي العراق أو بلين توقيعي أو هم عقدانا كراو لمانا بلام لها ما كاتيشا ترسيك هي براستي زور جار الباس لو دكريت باس ل بلين أوروبيا كاني كداعش بون وكوائستا داعستا نقرام ريتو بولاتا كاني خويان إمجا زور بشيان هذيك مجموعية كي زوريان هي هاولاتي أوروبان آية تاعستا بلين بوليسي أوروبا بعام يعني ولاتا هزل هذا كان لأوروبا تشي بورقرتنوي أم داعشانا بولاتا كاني خويان
و پرسیارێکی زۆر گرنگە لە یەکێتی ئەوروپا ئاکرێ بەس ئەگەر ڕێگەم بدەی پندێک هەیە لە ئەوروپا کە ئەوترێ هەموو ڕێگاکان ئەمان بنەوە بۆ ڕۆما بەس لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست هەموو ڕێگاکان ئەمان بنەوە بۆ تاران وانە پێم وا بوو ئەگەرم کۆنفرانسە هەر هەمووی لەسەر تاران وایە لە بری ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست مانای تایبەتی خۆی ئەبوو چونکە وەکو سەرۆکی پەرلەمانی پێشووی ئێران وتی ئێمە جاران دەستمان بە بەغا ناگەشت بەڵام لێرە بەدواوە 4 کەپیتاڵ 4 پایتەختی عەرەبی لەژێر هەژمونی ئێمەیە هەر بە ڕەشکاوی بەغا دیمەشق بەیروت سەنعا و پایتەختی تریش بەڕێوەن مڕەشەحن بۆیە ئەگەر پێشەوەی وەڵامی پرسیارەکەت دەمەوە ئەمەوێ بڵام هەمان ڕام هەیە لەگەڵ جنابی باڵیۆز چوونە ناو ستراتیژەتی بەریەکەوتن لەگەڵ ئێرانە لە بەرژەوەندی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە نییە ئێران پێویستی بە پاسیفیکیشن هەیە پێویستی بە ئێران کۆیت نییە قەتەر نییە ئێران یەکێکە لەو دەوڵەتە گەورانەی کە لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە بە شێوەیەکی سروشتی بۆ بە دەوڵەت یعنی ئەوە نییە کە بەریتانیەکان یاخود فەڕەنسیەکان دروستیان کردبێ وەک لە عێراقا دروستیان کرد یا لە عەرەبی سعودیا ترادیسیۆنێکی هەزاران ساڵەی دەوڵەتداری لە وڵاتە هەیە ڕۆژێک پاشایە ئەمڕۆ ئایەتوڵایەکە گرفتەکە ناگۆڕێ پرسەکە وەکو خۆیە بۆیە ئەگەر ئێمە بمانەوێ بەڕاستی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بخەینە دۆخی ئاشتیەوە پێویستە لەگەڵ ئێرانان ڕێکەوین و لەگەڵ ئێرانان ڕێکەوتن یعنی بە جۆرێک لە جۆرەکان چوونە دەرەوە لە گرفتی سووریا لە کێشەی سووریا چوونە دەرەوە لە کێشەی عێراق ئەبێ دانی پێ بنین کە عێراق کێشەیە ئێستا بۆ وڵاتانی سیستمی ئینتەرناسیۆنال چوونە دەرەوە لە کێشەی یەمەن چوونە دەرەوە لە کێشەی لوبنان لە لوبنان خۆتان نەزانن چ ڕوویدا لەم دووسە ڕۆژەی ڕابردووانە بۆیە ئەگەر بێت و لەبەر بەرژەوەندەکانی ئێرانیش نەبێ لە پێناوی بەرژەوەندی وڵاتانی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بە تایبەتی لەسەر ئەو سێ ئیشکالێتە ئاسایش سەقامگیری کێشەی ئابووری پێویستە هەموو ڕێگاکان بمان بنەوە بۆ تاران و پێویستە ڕێگای چەک نەبێ کامان باتەوە بۆ تاران بەڵکو ڕێگای دیالۆگ بێ جا بۆ وەڵام دانەوەی پرسیارەکەی جەنابەت زۆر بە کورتی بەداخەوە یەکێتی ئەوروپا یەک سیاسەتی نییە لە بەرامبەر هێنانەوەی داعشەکان کۆمەڵگای فەڕەنسی جیاواز مامەڵاکە لەگەڵ کۆمەڵگای ئەڵمانی کە جیاواز ئەکا لەگەڵ کۆمەڵگای هۆڵندی و هەر یەکێک تایپێک لە خۆی خەریکی گەشە پێدانەوە یەکێکی ترە لە لاوازیەکانی یەکێتی ئەوروپا کە ناتوانێت سیاسەتێکی تایبەتی نە بەرامبەر ئیمیگریشن ینی با بڵێن کۆچبەر نە بەرامبەر هێنانەوەی داعشەکان لەبیرتان نەچێ زۆرترین ڕێژەی ئەوروپیەکانی ناو داعش فەڕەنسین ئەوەی کە داتا لە بەردەستمانە بوو ئێمە لە 2015 2000 فەڕەنسی لە ناو ڕێزەکانی داعشا بوون بەشێکی زۆریان ئێستا زەواجیان کردو و مناڵیان هەیە تەنانەت دیالۆگ و گفتوگۆ و دەیبێتیش لەسەر ئەوەی ئایا مناڵەکانیش بینینەوە یان هەر بەتەنها مناڵەکان لەسەر هێنانەوەی مناڵەکانیش ڕێکەوتن نییە بۆ چونکە لەبەر دوو خاڵی یەکەمیان پیان وایە بەشێکی زۆر لە کۆمەڵگای فەڕەنسی باس لە دەوڵەت ناکەمە باس لە کۆمەڵگاکەم چونکە دەوڵەت کۆنەکشنێکی ڕاستەخۆی دروست کردووە لەگەڵ یادەوەری دەستە جەمعی کۆمەلگایە سەبارەت بەو پرسە پێی وایە هێنانەوەی ئەم مناڵانە ئەبنا هەڕەشەیەکی ستراتیژی گەورە بۆ داهاتووی فەڕەنسا بەشێکی تریشان پیان وایە ئەبێ لۆژیکی مافەکانی مرۆڤ زاڵت بێ و بیانهێنینەوە بۆ زانیاری جەنابەت ئاخر ڕستا ئەوەیە کە فەڕەنسا چەندین سنتەری دروست کردووە بە ناوی سنتەری دێغادیکالیزاسیۆن هەنی چوونە دەرەوە لە ڕادیکالیزاسیۆن بە ملیار دۆلاری تەرخان کردووە بۆ ئەم داعشانە کە چۆن بکرێنەوە بە مرۆڤی کۆمەڵایەتی و سەر لە نوێت بنێرێنێتەوە کۆمەلگا بخرێنەوە ناو کۆمەلگاوەکو ئەکتەرین
جەسەرکەوتوو بوون لەم کارەیە
بەپێ ئەو داتانەی کە لەبەردەسا ڕێژەی سەرکەوتن لەسەری تا ئێستا لە 15
وای خۆی دیرادیکاڵایزیشن یەکێکە لەو شتانەی کە دایما ڕێژەی سەرکەوتن تیدای زۆر کەمە بەڵامەوە عەلە لەقەل وەکو دەڵێن شتێکی دڵخۆشکەرە کە ئەوان زانیویانە دەردەکە لە کوێ و هەوڵە دەنکەوا بڵێن چارەسەری بکەنەوە شتێکی زۆر باشە بێتن. ئێستاش now we'll open the floor for some questions. I will follow the same policy that we have had. We will start with the ladies first, but I will try. We have quite a bit of time, so I will try and take as many questions as possible. We'll do that in 2 rounds, if that's okay with you guys. Okay? So, Amberine, we'll start with you here. Can you wait for the mic, please? Because they'll need translation.
My question is for the Russian ambassador, and it's about Turkey's demands that you authorize, well, they don't call it authorization, but they make it very clear that they want to do another intervention against the Syrian Kurds. And at the same time, we also know that you're trying to encourage the Syrian Kurds to make some kind of deal with the Assad regime. Can you envisage a situation, a scenario where on the one hand you are accommodating Turkey's demands to intervene in exchange for some kind of concessions in Idlib? And if so, how would you reconcile that with your apparent efforts to encourage the Syrian Kurds to sit down with the Assad regime and make a deal?
Thank you. We'll take a question in the back there.
سپاس تەلار ممتاز نووری دوو پرسیارم هەیە بۆ جەنیفەر و بۆ کاک عادل. کاک عادل بە پێی وەصفی جەنابەت بۆ وڵاتی فەڕەنسا کە ئینترستێکی زۆری هەیە لەسەر عێراق بەڵام بەداخەوە زۆر نایبینی ڕاستە ئێمۆشنەڵەکە کەلتوری هەیە ڕاستە تۆتاڵمان بینی هاتوو ڕۆیشتەوە بەڵام بە پێی ئەو بە کوردی خۆمان ئەو تۆخەنیە کە جەنابەت باسیەکەی لەوانەیە نەگەیشت بێت ئەگەر زیاتر بتوانین تەوزیحیکەی و پرسیارەکەی تانیاخانە بە شێوەیەکی تر لێکەم لەسەر مۆزوعی ئەوروپیە داعشیەکان کێشەیەکی زۆر وازەح هەیە کە تەهمیش کراوە ئەویش کامپی هۆلە لە کامپی هۆلە یعنی زۆربەی مافی مرۆڤ یعنی کۆڵەی بەجێهێنراوە چونکە مناڵی لێ لەگەڵ دایکەکانە هەمووی وڵاتی ئەوروپی باسەکەین کە ئەویان لە بەرچاو خۆیاندا نەناوە ئەم مناڵانەش گەورە بنجیلێکی تر دروست بووە کێشەیەکی گەورەیە بەسەر ئەو وڵاتی ئەو ناوچەی کە کامپی هۆلی تیا یعنی هەموو وڵاتەکان کامپی هۆلیان کردوتە قەزەیەکی سانەوی مالعلم لەویا تۆ داعشە هەیە و وابزانم عینی مەسافەیە لەگەڵ مووسڵە یعنی زۆر بە تەیارە زۆر دوورتر نییە لە مووسڵ. سؤالك تريشن بو Jennifer. My question to you, Jennifer, that since yesterday we heard that the state is staying in Iraq and in KRI, but your communications, your international, let's say when we see you on news and when we hear the local news, it doesn't say so. There are always plans for withdrawal and so on. And would you explain the differentiation between Iraq and KRI when you talk about your staying and your interests and stuff like that? Thank you.
We'll take some questions from the front here. Kaki Rizi Pesha.
سپاس والله من پرسیارێکم لەو باڵۆزی رووسیا بوو چەند جار ئاماژەی بەوەدا کە ئەو زۆر نیگەرانیان لە عێراق نییە لە لیبیا و سووریا هەیە لە کاتێک ئەوان مێژوێکی دوو دێژان لە عێراق هەیە بەمەجێ لە عێراقیشا چەوسانەوە هەیە و تیرۆر هەیە و بە تایبەتی مافی کورد بە ئێستایشەوە پێش هەیە لەکرێ بۆ نیگەرانیان لە عێراق نییە و ئەو نیگەرانیان لە سووریا هەیە ئایا شوێنی کوردەکانی سووریا لە سیاسەتی رووسیا لە مستەقبەلی سووریا لەکوێدایە ینی ئەو پرسیارە بنە لەو باڵۆزی رووسیا پرسیارێکش بە بۆم بۆ ئەو ئەمریکی باڵۆزی ئەمریکاوە بۆی رووسیا ئەوان چەند جارێک و ئەمڕۆیش و ئەوانەی دوێنێژ باسە لە سەقامگیری عێراق و ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست کرد لە ڕاستیە ئەو حەقەتە خوانی لێلادەن هەتا کێشەی کورد لەم ناوچەیە چارەسەر نەگرێ ئیستیقلال لە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاستە دروست نابێت.
زۆر سپاس. We'll take one question on that side, and then we'll get back. We'll get back to more questions. Yeah, Vladimir.
Hello, my name is Vladimir Vilgeberg. A question to the U.S. official. What's your position on the continued Turkish drone attacks in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and how do you see the Turkish operations here against the PKK? And a question to the Russian ambassador. What kind of role Russia could possibly play between getting a deal between the Syrian Kurds and Damascus? Because in the past, Russia also talked about a possibility of autonomy for the Syrian Kurds in Syria, but then later Russia didn't talk anymore about that. And I think Russia can play a significant influence over the Syrian government to change its opinion on, for instance, to have something similar like federalism here in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stop with these questions, just to give you an opportunity to answer those, and then we'll get back to the audience to take more questions. Jennifer, we'll start with you first.
All right. My translation was a little bit wonky there, so please put me back on course if I go off. I understood the first one to be about the U.S. assertions that we have no intention of leaving Iraq. You're asking how that differentiates from Afghanistan?
She's asking about the KRG.
KRG
and Baghdad.
Okay.
Like once we hear on news and when we do the official communication, we hear that plans of moving the state from Iraq. But since yesterday, for us it's a news. You confirm that you're staying.
Sure.
And then the other question was, is there any different deal with KRI than the total Iraq, or for you is the same? Just to confirm that.
Sure. A couple points on that. I mean, first of all, maybe I'll address the second piece as far as our policy towards Iraqi Kurdistan. That is, in any country, you know, we look at individual challenges, opportunities in various parts, and so we certainly, through our consulate here in Erbil, have slightly differing approaches to, you know, what our focus is in Baghdad versus what our goals are here. Among other things, we are very focused on what we perceive to be a pretty strong investment climate. There's a real opportunity here to expand trade with the Kurdistan region. There are obviously challenges with the internally displaced persons, and so we are focused on helping to implement the Sinjar agreement. And so, yes, we have a slightly different focus, but overall, I can say that the nuance of the transition of our military and security presence here in Iraq at the end of the year on December 31st away from combat operations does not mean that we are leaving Iraq. It is a very different circumstance from Afghanistan, for example. So we will continue with the Defeat ISIS fight. We will continue working with our coalition partners, and most importantly, we will continue to support, to train, to advise and assist the Iraqi security forces. What this transition on December 31st really means is there's a recognition that the capacity of the Iraqi security forces has really been enhanced over the last years, and ultimately it is within the capabilities and the purview of Iraq and its own military to protect its sovereignty. So we as the United States, we along with our international partners will be standing by to assist however we can. But again, it's a recognition of an important step forward in Iraqi sovereignty. With regard to the second question about how we can stabilize the region in Iraq without stabilizing Kurdistan, is that the correct? Okay. I go back to the same, which is we are absolutely focused on Iraqi Kurdistan as being central to the overall stability. We continue to support the Peshmerga as an important part of the overall security landscape here. We provide a variety of forms of assistance. We are looking at throughout Iraq, but with a special eye to Iraqi Kurdistan, helping to build Iraqi energy independence, to address some of the environmental challenges that lead to desertification and water shortages. So we absolutely agree that the unique challenges presented here are key to the overall security landscape, which finally leads to the question about Turkish operations here. I think the last panel addressed this in some detail. I would just say that we, as the United States, acknowledge the PKK as a terrorist organization, and it presents major challenges, not only to the Turkish government, but to the KRG itself. And that is something that we talk about in terms of, again, going back to support for the security relationship. The best way to address that is by addressing the presence and the role of the PKK here in the KRG, and that would be our approach to this, our policy. Of course, you know, we always support doing so in a way that avoids civilian loss of life. But if you want to resolve this problem, you've got to resolve the presence of the PKK here.
Thank you. I know a lot of people always talk about the military aspect of the support that the United States provides, but as it was mentioned yesterday as well, you know, there is support and technical assistance on many levels from the United States. Mr. Ambassador, you got a few questions directed to you. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. So I've got, if I understood it in the right way, three questions. Yeah. One concerns the Turkish activities in Syria, and then other questions are about Kurds in Syria. So if I'm mistaken, please tell me that. Well, briefly, well, thanks for these questions. I've worked in Syria for many years and worked in Syrian desk in Moscow in MFA, so this issue is familiar for me. Thank you. It gives me a chance to show that I'm smarter than I'm really. Since we don't have much time, I'll speak briefly. So in terms of Syria, there's no deal between Russia and Turkey. Absolutely, no deal. In terms of future of Syria, we disagree. Absolutely, totally. They want the Saddam regime's government to be replaced or ousted or whatever you like, so we are against that.
Assad's regime.
What did it say?
Saddam.
Ah, sorry.
Because of Freudian slip.
Iraq it influences Bashar Assad, yes. But I won't agree with the expression Bashar Assad's regime. It sounds negative. The present Syrian government and the Syrian president are legitimate president and government. They are UN members, so calling them regime sounds somehow not good, neither politically nor from even other points of view. So Syria for us is a strategic ally. It was not in the beginning, so when time was going and the level of Russian participation in solving Syrian problems was increasing, so finally we came to this situation that they became our strategic allies. So we don't make deals with anybody at the expense of our allies. What is going on with Turkey is the following. Well, Turkey, Iran, and Russia are members in main participants of Astana process. So Astana process started as process of bringing together Syrian sides, confronting Syrian sides. since unfortunately at that moment UN failed to do that, so 3 countries involved in Syrian events, they gathered together and decided to bring Syrians together, and they were Syrians fighting on the ground against each other. That's how it started. And then it developed into, from mediator's role into role of those who think about future of Syria and try to coordinate it. But mostly it is coordination in terms of avoiding clashes or war on the ground between Syrian sides and between involved sides. So in this respect, yes, we have very good level of cooperation with Turks in Astana framework on diplomatic, military, and intelligence level. It's very good, but it's not deal. So it's what we pragmatically are trying to do in terms of avoiding fierce fighting on Syrian land. At the same time, we don't recognize what Turks are doing in Syria. In terms of occupation of its territories, in terms of their support to terrorist groups and so on, we don't acknowledge it. And they know this. But thanks God, pragmatically, in terms of solving Syrian issues, we have reached the level that we disagree, but we don't exchange accusations and all this stuff. We are pragmatic. So this may cheat somebody and make him think that we are having some kind of deal. No, it's not. Then switching to...
Can I just ask a follow-up question before that on,
Sure.
on what you just said? So Russia really does play a major role in Syria, and I just wanted to find out what the position is with the SDF and, you know, and their participation in the negotiations and so on, because a lot of times, you know, when they're talking about the constitution, everything like that, that group was actually sidelined or marginalized. What is Russia's position on that?
Well, we, from the very beginning of Syrian political process, or when idea of Syrian political process came on table, well, when our international partners switched from idea of regime change in Damascus into trying to reach some settlement in Damascus. So we were against the idea of marginalization of any party. Well, we believe, and we are very strongly believing, that all Syrian sides involved should participate in the process. But there are things you cannot, you can do nothing with them. So there is Turkish veto on SDF participation in political process. And veto doesn't mean that Turks would stand up and leave the room. So Turks would stand up and leave the room with a huge, huge number of Syrian opposition members who would go outside with them. And that's the problem.
So Turkey is not being inclusive.
So for us, we have relations with the SDF on different levels. Our military officers in Syria, they have direct contacts with SDF. We have political contacts with them. From time to time, we receive Ilham Ahmad and other members of SDF leadership in Moscow. Russia is a federal state. We have absolutely no problem with other countries becoming federal, having autonomy or something of this kind. But if you allow me, I'll
Yes, of course.
switch back to questions
Sorry.
before I forget them.
Please go ahead.
I'll try to give answer to all 3 questions altogether, if you don't mind, so in order to save time. We are now facilitating negotiation process between SDF, Rojava, and the Syrian government. It's not an easy thing to be done. It's a very complicated process. Our ambassador to Damascus is authorized to play mediator's role, and he's doing this officially, or maybe not officially, but I have declared it here. So I mean that both SDF and Damascus know that he's making this mediator's role. As I said, it's not an easy thing because both sides are quite tough, so they are not easy negotiators. But we managed to persuade them, and they understand that they need to agree because any other option won't be good for both of them. But still, it seems to me that the process is moving slowly because they don't trust each other. Why they don't trust each other? If I start speaking about it, so we'll need another week to sit here and listen to me. So just trust me. They don't trust each other. The process is going slowly. We are trying to do our best. I hope that finally we'll reach some result. Because it concerns, and this is question number 2, Kurds and their future in Syria. So up to now, I can't say what future they are going to have. And nobody knows. Well, much depends on how Syria, situation in Syria develops and on what the Kurds would do. Their position, if we speak about Syrian Kurds, is very complicated now. I would say it hard, I would even dare to say that their future doesn't seem optimistic to me. They have become hostages of what they have done or what done with them in terms of recent years' developments on the ground. And this is very serious. But finally, I hope that as Syrian sides, well, Kurds in Syria, the Syrian government, would be able to reach some agreement, because we strongly explain to both sides that other options won't be good. And at least they listen to us. So let's hope for the best. Let's see. The issue of Syrian Kurdistan is complicated because their potential, their position differ gradually from what Kurds in Iraq have. You can't compare it. Even in terms of, this is switching to question number 3, even in terms of having autonomous region, for example. The idea is very good. It is on the surface. Well, it's so natural for an ethnic minority, ethnic group to have autonomy or kind of a state inside other state, like it is with Iraqi Kurdistan, for example. But it's not so easy with Syrians. Kurds in Syria, they don't have integral territorial entity. In the north, they are, how to say it, this place, that place, over there, and these areas are not connected with each other. And they are surrounded by areas where other ethnic groups live, who may be happy about being inside Kurdish autonomy, or maybe not, so who knows. The only area where Syrian Kurds really had majority and strong, historically strong positions was Afrin. But now, you know, with Afrin, it's hard to speak about what's going to happen. It's a tragedy. So this makes the situation even more complicated. And we now face the situation, for example, just sorry for going into details, but shaitan fit tafasil, the devil is in details.
2 minutes.
Yeah, 1.5.
Okay.
So now SDF, Rojava, is controlling territories with huge Arab majority, where Kurdish are minority of minority, أقل من قليل. So they are controlling it, and temporarily it's good for them. But for the future, when sooner or later they would have to make some kind of state. So would it be dictatorship of Rojava on local population, or they will have to make some elections? And if they make elections, who would be voted for? Who would come to power? Would SDF be happy to hand power to some others? So this is a big open question, a very dangerous one. So this is what I mean saying that it's all very complicated. And don't be angry with Russia. Well, we are trying to do our best, but you know, these Middle East issues, they make you crazy sometimes. They're so complicated. We thought that our Russian life was complicated. No, it's so simply easy, understanding, and so on. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, definitely. The Middle East is quite the region that is very complicated. Kak Adil, there was a question that was اگر وڵامی بدەوە.
اوکی من هەوڵەدەم بە کورتی وەڵام دەمەوە بۆی کاتەکە بۆ پرسیاری تر بەجێ بێڵم ڕەنگە بەلایەنەوە گرنگتر بێ کەم پرسیاری لەسەرەوە کرد ئەوەی کە من باسی فەڕەنساکەم کە ئەیەوێت عراق بکە بە شەقی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بەس نایبینین بە کەمی بینین خۆی لە ڕاستیە ئەگەر بە ڕستێکی کە دەست پێ بکەین ئایا ئەمریکا ئەیەوێت لە عراق بکشێتەوە نەخێر ئایا عراق گرنگە بۆ ئەمریکا نەخێر هەردووکیان هەر نەخێرن عراق ئەو گرنگیەی جارانی 2003 تا 2011 نەما بۆ ئەمریکا لە سیاسەتی دەرەوەی ئەمریکا عراق زیاتر ئەو داتانەی کە بدێن تەحلیلی ئەەکەین زیاتر وەکو کارتی فشار لە بەرامبەر کۆماری ئیسلامی ئێرانە بەکار ئەهێنرێ و مامەڵەی لەگەڵا ئەکرێ عراق گرنگە بەس وەکو کارتی فشار لەسەر ئێران عراق ئەو گرنگیەی جارانی نەماوە ئەوە خاڵێک اینجا کیان بۆ شایە پڕەکاتەوە ئەگەر من پێتان بڵێم ئەمە فەڕەنسای ئێمانوێل ماکرۆن پڕێکاتەوە هەڵم ڕاستگۆ نیم و ئەستەنانە سەرۆک ماکرۆنیش خۆی پێی وایە کە فەڕەنسا ناتوانێت ئەم بۆشاییە ئەمریکیە پڕ بکاتەوە بۆیە زیاتر لە ماوە چەند ساڵێک ساڵ و نیوێکە سەرۆک ماکرۆن پێشنیارێکی بۆ یەکێتی ئەوروپا کردووە بۆ دروستکردنی سوپایەکی یەکگرتووی ئەوروپی کە بتوانێت لە بەرامبەری رووسیا لە بەرامبەر چین لە بەرامبەر وڵاتە یەکگرتوەکانی ئەمریکا هەرچەند پەیمانی ناتۆش هەیە بەڵام یەکێتی ئەوروپا بەبێ هێزێکی سەربازی ناتوانێت دیپلۆماتەکانی خاوەنی قسەی خۆیان بن لە هەر شوێنێک دیپلۆماتت هەبوو بەس سەربازت نەبوو تۆ هەر لاوازی لە هەر شوێنێک سەربازت هەبوو دیپلۆماتت نەبوو تۆ هەر لاوازی لەبەرەوە ئێستا پرسی دروستکردنی سوپایەکی یەکگرتووی بۆ یەکێتی ئەوروپا پرسێکی زۆر جدیە بۆ 4 ساڵیدا 5 ساڵی داهاتووی ئێمانوێل ماکرۆن هەرچەند هاوڕێ ئەمریکیەکانمان زۆر ئیزعاجەکات ئەو خاڵێکی تر بێگومان فەڕەنسا ئێستا ئامادەیەکی زۆری هەیە جاری پێشووتم لەسەر ئاستی عەدەد ژمارە ڕەنگە نەیبینین ئێوە وەکو جنۆکە وابن بەڵام لەسەر ئاستی سەربازی فەڕەنسا دووەم هێزی سەربازیە لە عێراق و هەرێمی کوردستانە دوای ئەمریکا لەبیرتان نەچێت کە هێزی سەربازیش دووەم هێزی سەربازیە لە عێراق و کوردستانە ئەوەیە کە فەڕەنسا ئەوێت بەڕاستی بە پێچەوانەی ئەمریکاوە کە ئێرانی کردووە بە چەقی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست فەڕەنسا ئەوێت بەڕاستی هەر بەڕاستی عێراق بکە بە چەقی ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست و هاتنی سەرۆک ماکرۆن بۆ بەغاو مانەوەی لە هەولێر خۆی بۆ خۆی مەسیجێکی زۆر گەورەیە بۆ ئاڕاستی ئەڕوا دونک فەڕەنسا لەسەر ئاستی ئابووری لە بەسرەوە هەتا ئەگاتە زاخۆ ئەوەنەی من ئاگام لێبێ زیاتر لە 370 پرۆژە ماکرۆ پرۆژەی ئابووری بڵاو کردوێتەوە بە عێراقا و بڕۆ بۆ شەنگال و مووسڵ هەر لە میترۆی بەغاوە بیگرە هەتاوەکو دروستکردنەوەی زانکۆی مووسڵ هەتاو هەم پرۆژەکە ناتوان یعنی مەبەستمەوەی ڕەنگە ئێمە بە چاو ئێستا نەیبینین بەڵام فەڕەنسا ئەکشێ بەو توانایی کە خۆی لە بەردەستیایەتی ئەو خاڵێکی تریشێکتر کۆتایی پێیانم ئەوەیە کە ئەم کشانەی فەڕەنسا خۆشبەختانە بە هاو ئاهەنگیە لەگەڵ کۆشکی سپی و سەرۆک جۆ بایدنە لەسەر دۆسەی عێراق دیالۆگێکی بەردەوام لە نێوان هەردوو سەرۆکەکە هەیە چونکە بەبێ یەکتری ناتوان ئەو کارە بکەن کەمپی هۆل بە من بە ڕستەیەک بڵم یەکێکە لەو کوشماخ چۆن کەم بە کوردی کوشماخ مۆتەکە ببورە مۆتەکە یەکێکە لەو مۆتەکە گەورانەی بەسەر سنگی هەموو دیپلۆماسێتی وڵاتانی سیستمی ئینتەرناسیۆنال بەگشتی و یەکێتی ئەوروپا بەتایبەتی و فەڕەنسا بەتایبەتی ترەوەیە سەرەڕای ئەوەی کە ئەزان کوشماخ ینی با بڵێن مۆتەکەیەکی زۆر گەورەیە کە خەویان لێ ئەسڕێنێ بەڵام بەداخەوە من هاوڕام لەگەڵ جەنابتا تا ئەم چرکە ساتە هیچ یەکێک لە وڵاتە ئەوروپیەکان هەموو یەکێتی ئەوروپا تەنانەت ئەمریکاش جگە لە ستراتیژێتی ئیدارەکردنی کەمپی هەول هیچ ستراتیژێتێکی تریان نییە لە بەرامبەری ئەو کەمپە و من هاوڕام ئەو کەمپە لەسەر ئاستی مامناوەند مەودای مامناوەند ئەکرێ ببێ بە هەڕەشەیەکی زۆر گەورە بەسەر ئاسایش و سەقامگیری نەکە ڕۆژهەڵاتی ناوەڕاست بەڵکو و ئەوروپا و ئەمریکاشەوە
سکی جناب زۆر ڕاستە بە تایبەتی کە باس لە کامپی هۆڵەکەین چکۆیەک دوێنێکش کە باسکرا هەندێک وتیان یان کامپی هۆڵیان ڕەوزێ یان ئەبێتە زانکۆیەک بۆ ئەوەی کەوە خەڵکی دڕندەی لێ دەربچێتن و حتمما لەسەر مەسلەی ئەوەی کەوە ئەگەر هێزت نەبێت دیپلۆماتیک نابێت ئەوەمان بینی لە ئەفغانستان کە هێز ئەمریکیەکان کشانەوە هەموو دیپلۆماتکارەکانی وڵاتەکانی تریش مەجبور بن کەوا بکشێنەوە چونکو هێزێک نەبوو بیان پارێزێتن لەوێ چەند پرسیارێکی دیکە دەبین لەو لاوە دەست پێ دەکەین کاک دکتۆر فەرموو جدوادینەوە بەڵای جەنابەت.
Thank you, and I have a few very quick comments and then a question. First of all, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill said, politics is the house of horse, and this is exactly applicable to the US foreign policy and Russian foreign policy in Syria. As for Obama administration, it gave a very clear signal to the Assad government, go, slaughter, do whatever you want, but don't use only chemical weapon. And of course, in the result was a total failure, a dismal failure for American foreign policy, because Iranian militias and other terrorist groups were able to prevail. And the same thing true. His Excellency, the ambassador, is telling us, well, it is not appropriate to call, the Russian ambassador is telling it's not appropriate to call Syrian regime. Well, what it is, Mr. Ambassador? It came to power in 1970 with a military coup. It is a military junta have been ruling Syria with a very bloody history. So what else we want to call it? The question is this, to the the Russian ambassador also said there has never been deal in Syria, in Rojava. There have been 3 deals with Turkey with regard to Rojava, and people in Kurdistan know that deal. My question to Ms. Jennifer is this. You say, okay, by end of December, we will change the function of our troops. We will assist the Iraqi security and army. Well, first of all, Ms. Jennifer, many academics in US, in the West, have come to the clear conclusion, conclusive evidence that you created in Iraq a failed state. And the army, which you have created, and the security force, is a Shia militia, whether they are dressed in Hashd al-Shabi or in the Iraqi troops army, regular army. Only 2 weeks ago, few people in Kirkuk demonstrated, celebrating the victory of their election victory. They sent tanks against them. So this is the army which you have created, assisted, and you are going to assist. The question is, how are you going to change? How are you going to continue this policy? Thank you very much.
There are 2 questions here at the front.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mohammed Sharif. I'd like to address my question to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Ms. Gavito, as you kindly know, this year marks the 30th anniversary of Operation Provide Comfort. And we Kurds are very grateful to the contribution and sacrifices of the United States, and we genuinely owe it to you for what we have today in Kurdistan today. As you also know, both the Kurdish people and the Kurdistan Regional Government is very grateful and appreciates this relationship, which is quite unique. As you know, in both the Middle East and North Africa, it's quite unique to have both the people and the governments being friendly and appreciative of the United States. Does the United States reciprocate this sense of good feeling between the Kurdistan Regional Government, its people, the ordinary people, and America? And secondly, we hear from your sources on many occasions that you want to have a strong Kurdistan region within the boundaries of a federal Iraq. Could you tell us what you mean by a strong Kurdistan region? And secondly, why do you want a strong Kurdistan region within the boundaries of Iraq? Thank you very much.
You can just hand the microphone to the person next to you.
زۆر سپاس لە جەنابی باڵوێزی رووسیا پرسیارێک بۆچی ئەوەی کە دەبینین لە رووسیا جەستە چاو دام گوێ هەمووی لە سووریا هەیە بەڵام بۆ ئەو کاریگەریە کامل جەستەکەی لە عێراق نییە بە تایبەتی لە هەرێمی کوردستان بۆ زۆر لەلایەوە عێراق کاریگەری نییە و زۆر گرنگ نییە بۆچی ئەوەندە سووریا بەلایەوە گرنگە و بەڵام عێراقوان نییە هەر قسەیەکی کاک عادل باخەوانیش بۆ خانمەکەی ئەمریکی وتی لە 2003 تا 2011 ئەمریکا عێراقی وەکو ئێستا بەلاوە گرنگ نییە وەکو ئەو کاتە بەڕاستی وایە ئەمریکا ئەو گرنگەی لە عێراق نماوە ینی عێراق بەلاوە ئەمریکاوە گرنگ نییە سوپاسە دەکەم
زۆر سپاس. We'll take one last question in the back, then give everybody an opportunity to answer.
Thank you.
We'll just last question.
Thank you for the informative and eye-opening presentations. Somewhat depressing from some, but it's the reality. My question is for Jennifer. In the Middle East, when you speak to politicians, they tell you if you are an ally of Russia or Iran, they stand by you to the end, no matter what. You just saw the comments about the Syrian regime. But if you are an ally of America, they use with you the taxi policy. They use you from A to B, and they drop you like hot potato. The SDF is a good example, and the PKK, who fought alongside the Iraqi and coalition forces against ISIS. Now they are being, the drones against them are being assisted by the United States, and they still are considered a terrorist organization. What would you say to those, to your allies in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have 10 minutes, so I'll give everybody, we'll start off with you. Most of the questions were to you, Jennifer.
Sure.
And then.
Happy to quickly run through some of these. Let me start with the Kurdistan region. Okay, sorry. Let me start with the Kurdistan region. One thing I should have noted earlier is, as you drive by on the highway, you see this enormous construction complex that is the new consulate compound for the United States. And I point that out because it is an enormous investment in the Kurdistan region, and really, to the point about a hot potato, is a visual reinforcement that we have no intention of dropping our commitment to the people of the KRG, the people of the independent Kurdistan region. We are, in fact, doubling down on our investment here, our investment in the people and expanding cultural ties. I recently had the honor of giving a very large donation to the Citadel for restoration of work there. We're expanding education opportunities, both supporting education here in the region and also enhancing opportunities for students to go to the United States. We're expanding trade and investment. We are working together on climate. And so we are working every day through our presence here in Erbil to strengthen the independent Kurdistan region. And so that's what we mean by strong, one that is stable, economically prosperous, well-educated, and a good partner to us and a good partner within the larger Iraqi construct. As far as the question, and I'm really glad you asked this, about Iraq no longer being important to the US or as important as it was in 2003. First of all, strategic alliances change over time, and I'm really happy to say that where we are today is not where we were in 2003, which was an outgrowth, of course, of a series of tragic circumstances culminating in 9/11. So no. Our relationship with Iraq today looks very, very different. It is not, however, less important. And the strategic dialogue, which concluded in July of this year with President Khatami's visit to Washington, established a framework that laid out a vision for how we are going to work together in the coming years to strengthen that strategic relationship. We certainly see Iraq and its stability as important to regional stability, but not only through the lens of Iran, for example. By having a stable and prosperous Iraq, you enhance the prosperity of the Gulf states. You diminish the malign influences that seek to undermine governments. And so we see that more than ever as a foundation to all of our national strategic goals. One thing that doesn't change over the course of administrations or politics is, of course, every country up here acts in its own national security interests, and that is the case for the United States as well. And we see strategic partnership with Iraq as a long-term strategic interest, and so we have no intention of walking away. I want to say one other comment, and that is with regards to Syria. I think it has to be said that legitimacy is granted through the population, through the citizens. And any country that uses torturous methods, whether it be chemical weapons or others, on its own people is not a legitimate government. And I feel like I have to speak out on that. We are engaged in the political process to end the suffering of the Syrian people, but the idea that the Assad regime credibly represents its people, I think, is a fallacy.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador?
So I still have time, I hope.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
you do.
Well, regarding the first question, it was quite emotional, but still I'm grateful for it, though Russia came under attack again on Syrian issue, but we've got used to it since 2011. So I would explain why the word regime shouldn't be used towards Damascus government. It's not the issue of law and international law only. If we speak about the reality on the ground, so I would ask, if not the present Syrian government, what would have been the alternative for Damascus, for those who would have ruled in Damascus? So imagine this regime, if you want it as a regime, is gone. So who would have taken its position in Damascus? Let's get back to the events. So it would have been either Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, well-known, or probably his name, Mohammed Julani from Nusra. Well, Iraqi opposition failed to push forward any other candidate for, I won't say
Syrian opposition
presidency, because Islamic states don't have presidents. Well, and that was the situation. For us, the way we dealt with Syrian issue, it was changing from year to year. It started with our attempts not to allow Libyan scenario being fulfilled in Syria in 2011, 2012. I would remind you about Libya. So look what happened to Libya. And we tried to avoid the same fragmentation of Syria. It would have been a catastrophe for the region. And here in Iraq, you know it very well. So, and then step by step, when situation was deteriorating and there was direct political, financial, and military interference into Syrian conflict from outside the sides, with support to terrorist groups, Nusra and ISIS. And I think that in the future we'll know a lot of interesting facts about where ISIS came from and who it was supported by. At certain periods, not always, but at certain very essential periods. So at that time, we had to make this choice. We had to send our forces to Syria, and this way Syria became our ally. So we still want Syrian issue to be solved, but we don't want to come under attack on Syria. So for what? For martyrs we had on Syrian land, for money we had to invest into Syria, for efforts of our militaries who fought fiercely against terrorist groups. So for what we are coming under attack? I don't understand it. With all respect to emotional feelings of some people who are not happy about this regime, if you want it, staying, but say what would have been the alternative. Speak clearly about alternatives. I'm afraid we didn't have much choice in this respect. As for Russian role in Syria, in Iraq and in Iraqi Kurdistan precisely, as I mentioned before, and I'm happy to say this, Iraq doesn't need a role of Russia and level of Russian involvement which Syria needs. And we are not happy about level of our, the role we are playing in Syria in the long term. We are not happy about carrying all Syrian problems on our strong but human Russian shoulders. So thanks God, Iraq is not in the position like that. When Iraq needs our help, we are ready to support. When there was fierce fighting with the ISIS and Iraqi government asked us for military support, we sent to Iraqis military planes before any papers were signed. That was direct instructions from President Putin, and we did it. And up to now, Iraqi military officials, generals are grateful to us. They said it was, first of all, moral support. When Iraqi troops saw that they're having Russian planes newly arrived, and the terrorists saw that there are newly arrived Russian planes, it was very important at that time. You probably all remember this. In terms of Kurdistan, Kurds are our friends since long ago, and we would be happy to play any kind of role you need. We are ready to cooperate in any sphere, in any field you want us to come to. So it's the question to Kurdish leaders what they want from Russia, and Russia with its big heart, قلب روسيا كبيرة, we're ready to come. If you have some ideas, I can write them down after the conference and make a report. So it's absolutely not a problem for us. If we have any problems, they are usual problems coming from economic agenda, political situation, well, God knows some other reasons, but it's never a bad political will from both sides. On the opposite, each time I come to Kurdistan, I feel like at home here. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to give you 1 minute. I know there weren't any questions, but if you have any, اگر هیچ یک دقیقه
این یک دقیقه شمنا یک رستم اموی بلم الله اموی بلم اوكي اموی بلم هندێک وڵات هەن لەبەر کۆمەڵێک پرەنسیپ کاتێک ڕوبەڕووی هەڵبژاردنە بنەوە لە نێوان تاعون و کۆلێرا اختیار ناکەن. بەس تایبەتمەندی رووسیا لەوەیە کە لە نێوان تاعون و کولێرا لە پێستێل و کۆلێرا تاعون و کۆلێرا هەمیشەیەکیان هەڵەبژێرێت. و لە نێوان تاعونی داعش و تیرۆریزم و کۆلێرای ئەسەدا کۆلێرای ئەسەدی هەڵبژاردووە. سوپاس.
زۆر سپاس. Thank you, all of you, for the statements, and thank you very much for the wonderful questions.